Now, the Britishers, after the Battle of Plassey in India, started enclosing land in India because they saw that they could make huge profit or collect revenue from the land. So, the land revenue collection led to the enclosures of land in India by the Britishers after the Battle of Plassey. When they started enclosing land, naturally the land under forest and pasture started declining. And the foresters and the pastoralists found it very difficult to survive in such conditions where they had to pay a price for everything that they collected or actually made their cattle graze. Well, the Britishers also forced the Indians to grow few crops which were indigo, jute, sugarcane, cotton and wheat. Naturally, the crops were such which could feed the urban population of England or which could provide raw material to the factories of Lancashire and Manchester. Well, let's talk about the British trade in China. It had so happened that the East India Company started trading in China and they traded in tea and silk from China. But tea started becoming a very popular drink in Britain and the Britishers found no commodity by which they could actually make profit from the Chinese trade. They in fact had to pay silver coins or bullion to buy the Chinese tea and the silk. The Confucian and the Manchus rulers of China were suspicious of the foreign merchants and of course they did not allow the new commodity which the Britishers wanted to sell in China, which was opium. But we see that the Portuguese were the first people who started selling opium in China in the 16th century. In the beginning, of course, it was taken for medicinal purposes, but later on the bad effects of it were seen on the people's health, physical and mental. That is why the rulers of China banned opium trade in China. Then started the illegal trade of opium in China, making the people of China habitual addicted to opium. So such was the opium trade because the Britishers had to buy tea and silk from China, and if they would to pay the entire sum into silver bullion, the economy would be shattered. So they looked for an alternative called opium, forced opium into the Chinese market, making them addicted to the opium which was bad for them. I'll be talking in detail about it in the next clipping. The story of the opium trade continues like this. Actually, the English people became addicted to tea and the Chinese became addicted to opium due to the opium trade in China. It is said that the entire population of China, whether they were soldiers, businessmen, farmers, cultivators or the army men, became addicted to the opium. Lin Ziyu, a special commissioner at Canton, said that about 4 million opium smokers were found in China at that time. And the opium sale in China in fact financed the purchase of tea for the Englishmen. So for their own profit, for their own actually interest, they made the Chinese addicted to opium. But the big question is, where did the opium come from? That is, where did the Britishers get the opium to trade in China? And the answer is that when they conquered Bengal, they forced the Bengal farmers to grow opium for them. Of course, the farmers were unwilling to grow opium for various reasons. The first reason was that it had to be cultivated on best of the fields and it had to be manured properly. And wherever the opium is grown, the land tends to become infertile or barren. When the crops of opium had to be grown on the best fields, then the pulses were to be grown on inferior lands, which meant that there would be decrease in the production of pulses. Sometimes the farmers did not have their own land and they leased land, and when they took such good fertile land, they had to pay heavy rent. We also see that opium is a very difficult crop, a very delicate one. It has to be actually manured and cultivated and looked after much more than what the other crops need the care, which meant less time for other crops. We also see that the prices which the Britishers gave to the farmers for opium was such that it was an unprofitable venture. So, all this made the farmers of Bengal unwilling to grow opium, but they were forced to grow opium, and I continue with the remaining part of the story in the next clipping.